I'm Jim Check. You're watching Kelowna Now. I'm here with Ian Burns, and we got a special edition here for you. Premier Eby says the United States wants to redraw our borders. And he says he's going to pull all the American booze off the shelves, and not just the red state booze, all the booze. Ian, you there?
And
there you go.
And probably the truest thing that David Eby has ever said in his entire life, I would say, where he said, "You can keep your watery beer."
There you go.
I mean, I find this so funny that it's possibly the worst export that the Americans have ever sort of shunted onto the rest of the world is their alcohol. It's almost all universally garbage, except some of their wines. And yet this is what we're all talking about, their absolute worst export. It's quite amusing.
And then, that old saying, this escalated quickly. Why don't we play the clip there from Eby first, though? Let's play this clip here first.
Hey, everybody. We ready to go? Great. Good morning. Good to see everybody. Thanks for joining us here at BC Liquor Store in Victoria, British Columbia. It was about a week ago. We announced taking liquor products and other products made in Republican states off of the shelf here at the liquor store and at all of our public liquor stores across the province. Since then, we have seen a threat of additional tariffs on the dairy industry, an investigation into our lumber industry by the president with the aim of adding even more tariffs, and disturbing articles in the New York Times and other places about the president threatening to redraw our borders and pursue Canadian water. Now, the reaction of many British Columbians, myself included, is if the president's so interested in Canadian water, then we're going to help him out by letting him keep his watery beer. I'm here to announce today that we are removing the rest of the American liquor products from the shelves of the BC liquor stores. That's wine, distilled products, and beer. And we're doing this for a couple of reasons. One is to respond to the escalating threats that we're seeing from the United States. The other is to recognize the feeling that many British Columbians have now when we look at American products, we don't even want to see them on the shelf anymore. It's a matter of strategy to go after Republican products, to target Republicans, the ones who are doing this, to American families and Canadian families. But I have received many emails and letters and interactions with people who they don't even want to see American products right now in our government liquor stores. And so we're sending that strong message. We're responding to what British Columbians are asking for, and we are removing the remainder of the products. In addition, we'll be, in the coming days, introducing legislation to enable us to add tariffs to vehicles traveling from Washington State to Alaska. We'll be working with the federal government in supporting their continued tariff response against the Americans, as well as with premiers across the country, including to remove internal trade barriers to grow our economy. And we'll be accelerating projects here in BC to make sure we can stand on our own 2 feet and support families across the province whose jobs may be threatened by these actions of the American president. With that, look forward to taking your questions.
Thank you very much.
Wow, that escalated. Starting to charge people for crossing the border as well. I imagine that'll be reciprocal here right away, so nobody will want to cross the border. And you said later on in this conversation, David Eby said he's canceling his trip to Disneyland, you said?
Yeah, he said his wife bought thousands of dollars of tickets for Disneyland. But then she saw him on TV talking about how everybody in BC should avoid going to the US for vacations, and therefore felt that they were obligated as a family to give that a miss. So yeah, he said he's going to abandon Disneyland.
You'd think this thing would get better. You think that calmer heads would prevail. But this is starting to remind me of an old movie called like The Tin Man with Danny DeVito, where when a couple breaks up and they start throwing each other's stuff out the window and stuff like that. Like this is getting we're starting to charge people for crossing borders, pulling booze off. We did a video interview, or like a streeter in front of a liquor store asking when they pulled off the red state booze, and people were kind of confused as to what. Maybe David Eby watched that because people were confused, like, why are we only pulling red state booze off? He did answer that later in that interview. He said, well, he was trying to work with some of the Democratic governors in Washington, Oregon, and California. But he said that is kind of like hopeless right now too, though.
Yeah, well, I can really understand that. And even, when you're in BC and you're in the sort of west coast of North America, there's an obvious like solidarity there, isn't there? And it definitely crosses the border. I think there's a real connection between people in BC and Washington in particular. That I just noticed that straight away as soon as I went to BC. It's like very evident. So there's also that. I think there's like in many ways that's kind of you're more likely to see people from Washington State if you're in BC than you are to see people from like PEI or Nova Scotia or something like that. It's like it does feel a lot more like a neighbor, which is what it is. So I can understand that. And then also he said that the Democrats have been like really trying to help. And I can believe that. I bet they are. I bet they're like on the phone to him and being like very friendly and very nice to him. So it sort of makes sense, doesn't it? But at the same time, Donald Trump is the president of the United States. He's not the president of the red states. So I mean, I think this was inevitable, really. But I mean, with the tolls, that is pretty obviously that's mad. And when I first heard that being chatted about, I thought like, there's no way that's going to happen. That's so crazy. And it probably won't happen. He just wants to pass the legislation so that he can make it happen. And I think the reason that he wants to do that is because if you go on if you go to American news websites or you watch American news TV shows, they're actually not really bothered about Canada. They're not really talking about Canada at all. It's not really in the news. It's like a very minor story in the US. It pops up now and then, but it pretty much it's like fifth, sixth, or lower sort of billing. It's not really a big story. So I think people like David Eby and Doug Ford with the electricity thing, they're trying to get the story to number one because they know that it's an obviously absurd situation. All they need to do is get the light on it, and then the Americans will sink it because it's so stupid.
Yeah, it's just like, again, charging tariffs for crossing into Canada. I mean, you can imagine that there'd be tariffs crossing in the U.S., and then it would just become just like just a massive kind of like escalation of tit for tat stuff, right? And at some point, maybe nobody even talks to each other. Like it's definitely getting out of hand. There needs to be some calmer heads here, right? Like pulling the booze off,
Yeah.
sure enough, but like in this New York Times article, let's talk about that New York Times article a little bit, because it doesn't exactly quote Trump in there, but it does infer that he said these things, right?
Imply, yeah.
Imply,
He
yeah.
well, the reason I don't know if we mentioned it, but the reason that we're talking about this article is because Eby did he mentioned this article by name
Yeah.
as a that's how he sort of falsely actually said that Donald Trump has explicitly said he wants to redraw the boundaries, the border with Canada. He hasn't. This is based on this New York Times article is based on like anonymous sources, but I mean the New York Times. I can't imagine they've just fabricated this. I imagine they did actually speak to somebody. So I would I would say that. But they say that these officials, because some of them are Canadian as well, not just US officials, and the Canadian officials would have probably, they probably were trying to get on the phone to the New York Times because they probably want this out there. But those officials say that Trump has learned that because the border was finalized in 1908. That was before Canada was considered to be, a fully independent country. It was still a British Dominion then. And Trump now looks at that as being a pretty sort of weak treaty because it was made with more with almost like Britain than like Britain was the sort of godfather, and Canada has changed a lot since then. So he seems to think that it's a weak treaty that can be exploited, and it's about like the way that they share lakes and rivers, and that's very relevant in BC with the Columbia, and that Trump wants to, it says in the article, wants to revise the boundary, which is, it's quite funny. I mean, people might be astonished by that, but presidents in the past, in the 19th century, have pushed for from in the US have pushed for much more generous borders with Canada, and this has been on numerous occasions where they've pushed for more land in places like BC, Yukon, over in New Brunswick, Quebec. Like they've done this a number of times, the Americans, so it's not actually that unusual.
Yeah, if you read that New York Times article, it even talks about, like the agreements that we have with the Great Lakes, and you talked about the Columbia River, and then also NORAD, which is a huge thing. We talk about NORAD on our really big show, which we do at 9 a.m. every morning. And NORAD is basically really manned by the Americans, right? Like we don't really have, military that comes even close to what the Americans can offer. No nuclear subs, no nuclear warships, no nuclear icebreakers, and no fighter jets, like that are younger than 40 years old. We have a fleet of, I think, 85 CF-18s, and I think, at any given time, maybe 65 of those are operational. And where they're flying Raptors and F-35s, and they have like a very strong naval fleet.
But we were talking earlier about NATO. Just like NATO exists for the United States, NORAD exists for the United States as well.
Yeah.
NORAD, which is why ages ago when we were talking about how crazy this could get, we brought up the possibility that Canada could threaten to, reduce its cooperation within NORAD, because that would scare the Americans. Obviously that wouldn't be great news for Canada either, but NORAD exists so that the United States can protect the homeland from the north. That's what it's about. The fact that he's even said to have said this is just completely insane. This article also includes a repetition of a previous claim that we heard that Trump wanted to get remove Canada from the Five Eyes intelligence sharing group as well, which is also bonkers, because Canada's considered to be not the best in that group, put it that way. The British and the Americans are considered to be, like, by far and away the heavy lifters in that group. But Canada does still have a spy service. It still gets intelligence. You wouldn't want to not have access to that, if you're an American president. So I can't help but think this is self-destructive from the Americans, or from Donald Trump, I should say.
I think it's mutual destruction, right? This is almost like a nuclear war between two great trading partners and great friends, and we've stood shoulder to shoulder for so many times. It's kind of ridiculous at how this is escalating, and are we escalating it more than they're escalating it? Because there's a lot of, in the New York Times article, there's a lot of implications there, but not a lot of like direct quotes. So maybe that's part of it. I'm not sure.
Well, I think the Canadian governing class they're not very competent, in my very humble opinion. I don't think they're particularly good as governing classes go. I think they're actually quite sort of stupid a lot of the time. But I think the one thing that they know is that America's the daddy. And I really do not think that they would seek out this kind of situation. I find that, and if that does come out, if that turns out to be true, if I'm wrong and they did actually provoke the US behind the scenes, then they're even stupider than I thought they were. But I just feel like it's so deeply ingrained in the Canadian psyche that you don't push too much with the Americans. Particularly not an erratic American like Donald Trump. So I would be very surprised. I think on the face of it, I think the story is exactly as it seems. That Donald Trump is a sort of aggressive, disruptor, and he's kept saying this stuff, and he's called Justin Trudeau, Governor Trudeau, and he's said he wants Canada to be the 51st state and all the rest of it, and he's invented these numbers about concerning the trade deficit that aren't corroborated by any other source other than his own mouth. And I just think I think it's all come from him, frankly, because that really does seem to be the case. But I guess we do have to wait and see.
Well, we do want to interact with our readers too and our viewers. And somebody said that F-35 is total garbage, though. But Justin Trudeau said that he wouldn't buy the F-35s back in 2015 when he first got elected. He said they were too expensive. And then he did order them, like I believe 88 of them in 2023. And well, I think our first delivery happens in 2026. And our current fleet, or our current is F-15s, which are 40 years old.
Yeah, I mean, Canada's military has been sort of brutally neglected, hasn't it? Really, I would say even if Canada was very focused on its military and was like really serious when it came to the military, I think it would still be quite hard to defend Canada because it's so big and it's such difficult terrain up there in the north. And this country, it's only a million people,
Did we lose you there?
migrants and stuff like that, who would never fight for Canada anyway and wouldn't expect them to. Then it's fewer than that, you know, it's like 30 in the 30s somewhere. That's like a very small population to defend a country like Canada, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very big and very difficult to work up in there, especially again without the nuclear ships, right? Like being the nuclear subs and nuclear icebreakers and nuclear warships, right? Just the power that they have and their ability to stay out there without refueling, right? That's what that gives them all that energy. You don't have to like get other ships out there refuel you and stuff like that if you're running a diesel ship, right? So, but we don't have any of those, nor
No.
plans to get any of those. And
I
plus,
mean, something as well. Sorry, you go on.
you wouldn't even be able to park them in BC harbors because they don't allow any nuclear ships in there. So I mean, there's
It
that,
would
right?
upset the orcas.
David Eby would say, no, you can't, you can't. So our biggest, like, we have two major ports, right? Vancouver and on the East Coast there, and I don't know. It's just we kind of boxed ourselves in with a lot of these rules. We make rules up that really hurt us.
Yeah, because we've been living in a time of luxury almost, and it's almost been like we've been blessed a little bit by the post Second World War, post Cold War environment, which was quite sort of cozy and safe. And a lot of the reason that it was safe and cozy is because America was out there, maintaining a global empire. And
I,
it now seems they're not as interested in doing that anymore. So then it's like pretty sketchy for us now.
So here we are reacting to New York Times articles, which it seems odd. And then if we look at the Mexican reaction, like, are we seeing the same level of like escalation with Mexico? I haven't seen it.
Yeah, and that's funny, isn't it? Because obviously the US actually has a lot of beef with Mexico, and it has a lot of legitimate qualms with Mexico. It's actually a pretty sort of the Mexicans really, you could argue, should be making concessions to the US because they've been a little bit cheeky, the Mexicans. Whereas the Canadians have been, if anything, the deficit is in the other direction. Like the Canadians have been too nice to the Americans. But yeah,
So
I haven't seen. Maybe the Mexicans are aware of that and they're playing it cool and they're like, okay,
yeah,
like
they've
we're in the
taken.
poo-poo right now, so let's play it really cool.
They've just let Canada like just like stir it up and take all the heat because it's like like you can't fight two people at the same time. I don't know, but it seems like, and then one of the readers has said that we've been provoking Trump for 5 years, and I would say a lot of that belongs with Justin Trudeau and the Liberals for sure. They've said that. But I mean, there's a difference between somebody that's not elected and somebody that is elected. So I don't think they've been as cheeky for sure when he's been in power here. But
I think, yeah,
it's
as well, you can't, it's not equal. I mean, there's no, so Trudeau has kind of used Trump and the Trump movement as, like a kind of a source of evil in the world, basically, hasn't he? He's used it as like a straw man argument, and he's tried to associate Pierre Poilievre for a long time now, for years now. He's tried to associate the Conservatives with Trump and that kind of thing. But I mean, that's like Punch and Judy stuff, isn't it? That's like it was very low quality, very low grade kind of teasing and insults. So I don't think what how he behaved could possibly justify a trade war and kicking Canada, removing the US from NATO and NORAD and all that. Like I just don't. They're not the same. I mean, he had to have come into this with these ideas already in his head, rather than as a reaction to Trudeau's crap banter.
Yeah, so we'll see where this goes, but this is like, it seems like a lot of that escalation right now, and maybe some Canadian politicians are using this to further their own, like we've seen with the Liberals. It's definitely furthered the polls for the Liberals, this escalation.
Yeah, undoubtedly, because I think they're largely succeeding, the Liberals, in trying to present themselves as like a really safe pair of hands and like the sensible people. And they're almost trying to say, like, look, the people down south, they wanted a big change and they wanted to get away from the sort of Liberal Party in America. And they wanted to try a radical out because they thought their problems are so big that they needed a radical. Now they're saying, look what's happened. So if you do the same here, if you vote for Pierre Poilievre to like stir the pot and change things, then it's going to end up like that. That's basically their entire sort of argument, isn't it? But I suppose the counter argument from Pierre Poilievre is, on the contrary, they're not a safe pair of hands. They've been in power for 10 years and they've overseen the economic degradation of Canada. They're not a safe pair of hands. They've proven themselves to be bad in so many ways. So those are kind of like those are the two arguments that are going to go head to head, I think, in this election.
Yeah, we have to remember that Canada was in a pretty bad economic shape prior to Trump getting elected, and that is definitely owned by the Liberals for the last 10 years.
Well, it can't be anyone else's fault, kind of. Yeah, although there's been many
And I would say
candidates
that,
have been put forward
and
to blame.
the same thing goes for British Columbia, because British Columbia even worse than Canada in many respects, and and a lot of it has to do with prioritizing, like even Chrystia Freeland said, virtue signaling and identity politics and climate change policy versus tapping the richest resource we have, and that's our energy. And we talk about energy all the time. And sad that it's come to this, but so no more watery beer in the liquor stores in BC. I don't know about the private liquor stores, but it's been pulled from the BC liquor stores. I don't know what. We don't have an answer here on what's in, because there's many private liquor stores here in British Columbia as well.
Maybe they'll be sold off to them on the cheap or something. But something that I find really interesting is David Eby. He's a big booster and supporter of BC wine, and he mentioned the Okanagan. I don't think he did it actually in the press conference, but he mentioned it in a press release. He mentioned, how you should get your wine from the Okanagan. The only thing is, if you add up all the wine from BC and Ontario, and I think they do a little bit in Nova Scotia as well, don't they? If you add it all up, it's about between 10 and 15% of the consumption of just Canada. So we can't even grow and produce enough wine to satisfy 15% of the population of just this country. So I do wonder when he keeps saying, and the same is happening with Doug Ford and all the rest of it, obviously in Ontario. They keep saying like drink Canadian wine, but there isn't enough to go around. I'm sort of I'm a bit concerned for Canadian wine here. I think I think they're gonna drink it dry, and then who we're gonna buy it off?
There we go. That's been this segment. You can find the story on kelownanow.com. And again, we'd like you to subscribe to our YouTube channel, our TikTok channel, our X channel. And you can subscribe to our newsletter as well. It goes up 365 days a year. And you can find it in your inbox before 7 a.m. And we'll be here tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. every day, 9 a.m. 5 days a week. Ian and I talk about everything that's going on in the world, and then we're going to do these special segments so that we can get our information on some of our video channels here. Seeing as how Bill C-18 still has us suppressed on Facebook and Meta, and as you say, Chrystia Freeland watches us all the time. She's no longer busy running in the leadership race. Maybe she can fix Bill C-18 for us.
That would be delightful. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what she thinks when she hears us, but feel free to call in, Christia. I know you're shy, but give us a
We would
call.
appreciate it. I did ask for an interview with Ruby Dalla. She's making a lot of noise out there still. So we'll see.
That would be a good one. Get the old Ruby on.
There you go. All right. We do thank you for watching Kelowna Now.
We don't just report the news, we live here too. We're your neighbors, bringing you stories that matter to all of us. No government funding, no outside influence. Kelowna Now.